Hi, so with food sanitation, it's going to have to be separated into a few different videos. So this is the beginning video of food sanitation. With safety and sanitation, it's important to understand clean versus sanitize. There's a couple differences between cleaning and sanitizing. Cleaning is only going to remove the dirt, like off the surface of a supply, while sanitizing is going to reduce microorganisms on a surface to a safe level. So imagine that you had a plate and you scraped off all the food particles or wiped them all off, but you didn't use any soap or water. The plate would technically be clean, but it wouldn't be sanitized to where it would be safe to eat off of. So with food, it's really important to do both cleaning and sanitizing so that you have clean surfaces to eat off of. And that's what the dish soap is going to do for at-home use and public use. In businesses, they would use a sanitizer water or a sanitizing solution in order to clean off more microorganisms, just to be extra safe or extra cautious. In class and in home use, you typically wouldn't need a sanitizing solution. The dish soap would be just fine with the hot water. When should surfaces that have been contacted with food be cleaned and sanitized? They should be cleaned when working with another type of food. This is especially true when there are foods that might have germs or foods that might have a allergen in them. You would definitely want to make sure that you are washing your surface before switching from one food to another, or if it's a different type of food. So say you were cutting up meat and then you switch to vegetables, you'd want to clean up your surface before you switch to those vegetables. When you're interrupted during a task, you would also want to clean and sanitize your area, because after a certain amount of time, bacteria builds up. Even if you had a clean surface to begin with, over time the bacteria builds up, and you don't know that somebody else didn't come behind you and dirty up that surface. After every use, things should be cleaned and sanitized so that they are cleaned for the next use. And then if you're constantly using something, if it's been in use for 4 hours, bacteria has built up to an unsafe level to where it could cause food poisoning or issues. So after 4 hours, if you're constantly using it, you would still need to sanitize even if you're continuing the same thing. So if you were cutting up carrots for 4 hours, although in this class you wouldn't be cutting them up for 4 hours, but maybe in a business you would be. At the end of 4 hours, you need to clean your surface even if you were going back to it. And then if it comes into contact with food, it should be cleaned and sanitized, because you want a clean surface so that bacteria and things are not getting into your food. Contamination. With contamination, contaminants are going to be any substance that should not be in food and can result in being harmful to the body. Most of the contaminants are going to be microorganisms like bacteria or parasites, things that you can't see with your naked eye. But there's also other things that could be contaminants. So like glass, while it's not a microorganism, it could be really harmful if it was swallowed. Or chemicals could be a contaminant. If they're swallowed, they could cause food poisoning or cause death. So it's really important to make sure that we're keeping food products safe. More information that you would want to know is foods may not look or smell spoiled, even if they are contaminated, but they could still cause illness. And if you think about it, if we had, if food always smelled bad or looked bad, there wouldn't be a thing such as food poisoning. We would never hear about that because it wouldn't occur. But because sometimes foods still look and smell good, even though they are contaminated, we end up with food poisoning. So it's important to keep the contaminants out. When do people contaminate food? They can contaminate it at any point in the process. But if they fail to wash their hands after using the restroom, even if you don't think you touched something dirty, it's still, bathrooms are really gross, so you'd need to make sure that you wash your hands. When you touch your hair, face, or body and then touch food, your body has a certain amount of bacteria on it, and that bacteria keeps your body safe and healthy. It keeps your skin healthy. It keeps your hair looking nice, and we need that bacteria. But if it gets into food and builds up to an unsafe level, it can cause food poisoning. When you cough or sneeze near food surfaces, you could contaminate food. So you'd want to make sure that you don't do that. When you touch or scratch or sore or abrasion and then touch food, you could also contaminate the food. Nobody wants your blood or germs in their food, so you'd want to make sure that you wash your hands. And then after touching anything that can contaminate food, and then touching food without washing their hands. So like if you touch trash, or if you touch the floor, or if you touch your clothing, you'd want to wash your hands, and so that you had a clean surface. There are many different types of contamination. There's 4 different types: physical, chemical, biological, and cross-contamination. And in the next few slides, I'm going to go over what those mean. So first we have physical contamination. Physical contaminants are going to be foreign objects that have accidentally gotten into food, such as hair, dirt, dust, or nail polish tips. An example story that I have: when I was little, we went on a field trip to a bakery, and before we went, I was like, I want to look all pretty, so I decided to paint my nails and make them look really nice. When I got there, the employees were letting everybody knead the dough before it went into the oven. And so I had the opportunity to knead the dough, and when it got to my turn, they looked at my hands and said, "Oh, you have fingernail polish on, you can't knead the dough." And I was really, really sad, because I was like, I just wanted to look all good for the field trip, because I didn't get to go on a lot of field trips. But then they offered me gloves, and those gloves would prevent the nail polish from getting into it. So we made it work. But nail polish would be a physical contaminant. Then we have chemical contamination. Chemical contamination is going to be chemicals that have gotten into food that may cause illness. So some examples would be pesticides, additives, preservatives, cleaning supplies, or toxic material from cookware. One thing to keep in mind with toxic materials from cookware is with your nonstick pans. Nonstick pans can have, if they get scratched, they actually start to leach chemicals into your food. So if you have scratched up nonstick pans, you want to get new ones, because that can cause cancer. Another type of chemical contamination would be cleaning supplies. So typically in the food industry, there's certain approved cleaning supplies that wouldn't cause food poisoning or a toxic reaction. Bleach is typically not approved with food, but there's vinegar, there's iodine, and then there's a quaternary sanitizer that people use as well. Biological contaminants are going to be things like bacteria, viruses, parasites, fungi, and toxins in food that may cause illness. And we'll go over these a little bit more in the next few slides. Cross-contamination is going to occur when ready-to-eat foods come in contact with contaminants. So an example would be when ready-to-eat vegetables are placed on a cutting board that raw chicken has been cut on. So think, for example, you're making a stir fry and you're cutting up the chicken so that you can get it started. If you were to cut up your vegetables on that surface after cutting the chicken, your ready-to-eat vegetables would no longer be ready to eat. They would have to be cooked before you could eat them. So you couldn't cut that raw chicken and then snack on the carrots as you're cutting them. So you want to make sure that you sanitize them between different food products. Foodborne illnesses are going to be food poisoning, so we're going to go over those. What is foodborne illness? So foodborne illness is a disease that's transferred to people by food, most commonly known as food poisoning, but foodborne illness is the more proper term. When and how can food become unsafe? Food can become unsafe at any time before it reaches your plate. So say, for example, there is spinach growing in a field. If the spinach growers were to use contaminated water to spray that spinach plant, it wouldn't matter how clean the distribution plant got it before they put it in packages. It wouldn't matter if the people at the grocery store were using really safe practices, making sure they were washing their hands before handling it. And it wouldn't matter if you were being very careful and you made sure to wash your hands before preparing a salad with that spinach. Because the person at the beginning of that chain was using unsafe water, it can cause food poisoning, even if everybody else is following the same rules or the safety and sanitation rules. It's really important that at every step, people are being very careful with your food, and that's why we have federal guidelines to prevent people from ending up with food poisoning. You could also have issues when purchasing food from sources other than a licensed food warehouse distributor. With most stores or most companies, they have to follow strict guidelines set by the USDA to prevent food poisoning. So, for example, if you were working at a restaurant, you couldn't just go up to like a farmer's market and purchase like strawberries and try to sell them in a dessert that you're making at your restaurant. Those strawberries, while they might look and be perfectly safe, you have to purchase from licensed or approved sources in order to be able to use them in your restaurant. Failing to cook food adequately can also cause issues if you're not cooking it to the proper temperature or holding it at the safe temperatures. So when I was working at a grocery store, they used to have a guy come in with a thermometer that worked for like the regulation company to make sure that everybody is following like safe food handling. And he would check the temperature of the hot case and check the temperature of the cold case and make sure that they were being held at the proper temperature in order to prevent food poisoning. And then poor personal hygiene could also become an issue. Everybody needs to make sure that they're washing their hands, that they're showering, that they're wearing clean clothing, that they're tying their hair back so that they aren't spreading contamination or getting things into the food that shouldn't be there. Next, what we have is microorganisms. And microorganisms are a living substance so small it could only be seen under a microscope. Most of the time, they're going to be harmless. Bacteria is common on any surface, and there's never going to be completely no microorganisms in things. They are just natural. It happens. They're commonly used in food production during the process of fermentation, too. They're safe types of microorganisms that we use to create different foods. So with yeast, we use those to leaven cracker products or bread products. So with that yeast, it ferments and creates a gas so that something that would be crunchy can become fluffy and soft. Bacteria is also used in order to change products. So they pour bacteria into either cream or into certain types of milk, and that can create like your yogurt, it can create your cheese, it could create your sour cream. All of those come from bacteria and certain types of enzymes being added to a food product. Mold is also used to create like blue cheese or cheese in general. Cheese in general is actually a mold. And then pathogens are also going to be microorganisms, but pathogens are harmful. So pathogens are microorganisms that are harmful and can cause disease. Some examples would be bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Bacteria are going to be microorganisms that are not always harmful and normally occur in food. Food can become contaminated at any point before you eat, so keep that in mind. Like I said with the spinach growers, if it's bad water, it could cause food poisoning, or even down the line, someone not following safe procedures could cause problems. So some examples of bacteria would be salmonella. Salmonella is commonly found with eggs or with chicken. Staphylococcal is actually a bacteria that we have on our skin, and typically it's safe and it's fine, but when it becomes too high of numbers, that's when we have issues. So if you had an infected cut and that got into the food, then you could